Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I am super delighted to be joined by Yasmine today from CloudBolt. Did I get that right?
You did.
Awesome. So, Yasmine, great to have you. We talked a little bit before this recording, told me a little bit about the story background. Super interesting there from a testing aspect. But before we dig into that, please share a little bit about what you're doing at CloudBolt and background there.
Awesome. I'm the COO here at CloudBolt, and CloudBolt actually acquired Stormforge, which I had been at for 3 years in April. So we've been here 5 years now. Currently looking across the portfolio, we have Stormforge was a Kubernetes, or is still a Kubernetes rightsizing solution, and CloudBolt has a portfolio of products around hybrid cloud management. So think like 0 to 1 provisioning, orchestration, everything around that, and then 1 to 2, all your patch management, ongoing automation needs. And then we also have a FinOps product that provides a sort of like an abstraction across all your cloud data, pulls in the costs, and then allows you to go take action on it to reduce and right size. It's been fun, I'd say, the last 5 years. It's been also kind of full circle for me. So before I was at Stormforge, I was at Puppet, which was like infrastructure automation. So I moved into the Kubernetes world, and then now I'm in that like hybrid world of everything. And it's funny to kind of hear some technologies that I used to work with continue to come up.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. And you told me a little bit about background of Stormforge, which originally was around performance testing, or there was at least some aspect of that. Obviously, I'm intrigued by that, and the segue to cost management, and also interested in just talking about the overlap there between performance testing and cost analysis and optimization, because those two things seem to be related, or I'm sure they are.
Yeah. So our first product we launched around like 2019, and it was still Kubernetes configuration to like right size it, but it was performance testing based. So we would use performance testing tools, whether it's ours or others, to generate a bunch of data. And then during the time that the data is being generated, the machine learning would run experiments to be able to see like, okay, based on the profile of the application from resources standpoint, but like say you're in a Java app, like garbage collection, heap, every knob you can turn, the machine learning would do experiments and then come up with, here's your best configuration. You could choose, I want to be more performance-based. I want to improve my performance. I want to improve my costs, or I want something right in the middle. The machine learning would give you like 20, 30 configurations and say, this is the most optimal based on what you were asked for. And we needed performance testing data to kind of generate what needed for the experiments. We actually ended up acquiring a performance testing tool called Stormforger, hence the name change to Stormforge. In 2020 to kind of help at that time, think like 2020 Kubernetes teams, there wasn't a lot of performance testing being done and everything was still siloed. You had like a platform engineer that was still learning Kubernetes. You had performance testing teams that maybe haven't started doing Kubernetes performance testing. And then developers who are like, still don't understand like how my app relates to the Kubernetes configurations under the hood. I'd say since things have changed, like we definitely, I run into like pretty mature performance testing teams that know how to test their Kubernetes workloads. We still have that like dichotomy between the app teams and the platform teams that are like, I don't really think about my Kubernetes configurations. I just kind of deploy the app and I'll set whatever was there, or I'll set an average. And then the platform engineer is like, well, this doesn't work, either performance problems or cost problems. We're still in that fun space, but I'd say now we just look at data live. So we'll just pull it from the platform. So less like required for performance testing, but when you are doing performance testing, we can like say, okay, I'm running a performance test during this time, just pull the data from that. So we still work a lot with performance testing. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's great. I mean, it feels like maybe you were a little bit ahead of the curve, like a couple of years ago, and then teams and organizations caught up as they became more familiar with Kubernetes and app deployments and kind of resource management. And I'm sure there's a bunch of Kubernetes in itself has evolved a lot, I guess, in that vein as well. And it's evolving quickly. But I mean, in general, it feels like something we get asked about is kind of cost optimization and resource optimization related to testing, not necessarily load testing, but also if you're running massive end-to-end tests or functional tests, is something that people ask us, how can you help us minimize our test execution costs, or what can we do? Is that something you see or saw at Stormforge, or kind of what different flavors of that did you see if you saw it?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it like thematically, but obviously we're biased from like the conversations that we're in and what we get access to. But the angle I've seen it is wanting to kind of like optimize the resources while that test is being run. So like, look, I'm running like 1,000 jobs. maybe those jobs are only 20 minutes, so
Mm.
they're not really taking that much time. But during that time, I had to provision a lot of resources to run those jobs. And I don't actually think I need that many resources, but I don't know what I need. And historically, we've kind of just taken the approach of like, it's running for 20 minutes. Like, do you really need to optimize it? But some of these large organizations that are literally running thousands and thousands of jobs are like, no, I do need to optimize it. And so we get like that level of conversation, but never something like, oh, I'm running like 3 hour long test. I want to optimize it to run it shorter. That's just not kind of the space that we've been in.
And we definitely see people running super like long running tests, like even over days, like they're generating load over a weekend just to kind of see how does the system handle that. But maybe when you run those kind of tests, cost isn't that important. It's more you're kind of investing into making sure that your system can handle that load. So it's maybe not as much of a concern there.
I think
Oh,
in that example you just brought up, what I've seen is at those moments, what you're really testing for is like, is my production environment going to be resilient? And it's funny, anytime I have a conversation with an organization that they're like, cost is really important. We're trying to get costs down. And I'm like, okay, well, like, where does it rank in your initiatives? And it's always resiliency, like deploying to prod faster. Those always trump costs.
mhm,
So running the long running test over the weekend, like you want to make sure once you deploy the apps to prod, like it'll be robust enough to take any increase in load. And so it's funny, people like care about cost, but not at the risk of performance. And that's something that we've had to put a lot of tuning into, just making sure like we're, I like to say we're a right sizing tool that will improve your reliability. And the byproduct is that you reduce your costs.
okay, okay. And I mean, once again, a little bit going back to testing, do you see that there is an increased concern about cost related to testing, or is it over the last years as people grow more into Kubernetes, or is it more like steady, low priority, or I'm
It's
just
been low
curious
priority. It's more the cost of the environments themselves. So like cost
themselves?
of testing environments comes up a lot.
Okay, 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 cool. Thank you. Another thing I wanted to ask, since I'm guessing AI has some kind of impact on what you're doing, both when it comes to cost optimization of AI workloads, but also maybe using AI to do cost optimization. You were really early, my understanding, with kind of algorithms that use machine learning, and how has the recent kind of generative AI wave influenced that, or kind of your approach to what you do?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people are like, "Oh, are you doing AI? Like, can you explain to me how it works and everything?" We're like, "What we're doing is machine learning. It's just advanced math."
Mm,
Like, I don't want to make it sound so simple because it's advanced math I don't understand.
mm,
But we, especially early on in the company's journey, we have had and have a bunch of PhDs working on the algorithm. And we have like three different algorithms we use depending on the profile of the data. And at the end of the day, like your requests and limits is just math because you want to make the requests and limits work. It has to work with the HPA. The HPA generally, like you'll set a target utilization. How those two harmonize, that's where like the hard math comes. Once one of our PhDs like drew all the formulas on the board, and I was like, then I definitely didn't take any of those math classes, but
mm,
something like we try and explain to people is like what we're doing is advanced math. There's no like you can't hallucinate because it's not generative. It doesn't need a bunch of inputs either. So we collect like 20 or so metrics and we
mm,
can provide recommendations really quickly, but the more data we have, obviously the better the recommendation is. But also that allows us to like every workload, every Kubernetes workload gets its own unique model. And we can scale
mm,
that without it being cost heavy for us in the back end because what we're doing is like machine learning based math. We're not using any like large language models and all
mm,
that. Now,
mm,
I say all that. You asked about what's changed. What's changed is like everybody is used to interacting with software or anything really now with a chatbot. I can
mm,
tell you, like, I ask questions all the time. And so some stuff that we are working on at CloudBolt, the company, to kind of interface to all of our products is a chatbot that will look and say like, okay, tell me which one of my workloads are set to auto deploy or what have been my most over provisioned workloads in the last 2 weeks.
mm,
Technically, you
mm.
can go into the UI and answer that question. You can ask it from the CLI, but people like a chatbot. So that's the type of stuff that we're adding. And it's
That's
been a
super
fun journey.
interesting. Yeah, because I mean, we're seeing the same on our end, where engineers are using their IDEs, which have integrated LLMs like Copilot and Cursor, etc., and then they're interacting with their ecosystem of tools using MCP servers and all that. And to your point, it's like it's a new way of, instead of a CLI, you have a more of a natural language way of interacting. I mean, the experiments that we've done, and we just launched our own MCP server, is that it provides some pretty sometimes astonishing capabilities. But to your point, often you'd have just done the same thing just by going to the dashboard or doing the same. But the fact that you're doing it in one place, and maybe that the LLM can then integrate that with other tools, right? So it's not an isolated island of functionality, but you can then correlate that to other things, is super interesting. And I'm guessing it is similar for you, if you can use, if someone can do those kind of analytics and then maybe correlate that to some other thing they're doing, and then
Yeah.
try to help use the LLM maybe to figure out, okay, I'm seeing this changes in cost, what changes in our code could be related to that. And it's, I don't know, to me, when I hear those things, I'm like, yeah, right. But then I've tried it a lot myself, and then it's like, oh my God, it's actually working. It's actually working much better than I thought. It's not perfect, of course, but it does. So I do get the fascination. I'm a bit bitten myself, of
Yeah.
course.
It's definitely like I don't trust it always. I always like fact check everything.
Mm,
But I think we're gonna get to the point where that convenience factor is just what people expect. And, like, we're not there yet. People are still kind of toying with
mm,
it. It's a nice to have, but I do think we'll get to a point where, like, the convenience factor of having everything in one place, being able to just ask across whatever tools, and then you have the answers, kinda like Google, right? Like, before
mm,
Google, people would go look for things, but once Google came out, no one's gonna go, like, research something separate. Like, you just get it all once, or, you know, shipping. Right?
mm,
Like,
mm,
I used to go to the store. I rarely go to the store now. Once it hits
mm.
that convenience factor, I think it's just gonna be table stakes for any software. Um, it'll be
Yeah,
an interesting world.
yeah. I mean, I'm looking at it from a software development perspective, but I'm guessing also from an ops perspective that people might
Oh, I
move to
use
an
it for everything.
operation.
I'll, like, feed it spreadsheets and, like, an outline, be like, "Here's what I'm looking to put, like, give me an outline for a deck," or, like, create
Mm,
the outline of slides for me. Busy
mm.
work that I hate doing, it's great for that.
Okay, cool, cool. Talk a little bit more about testing. Do you know how the teams at CloudBolt are testing the tools that you're building? I mean, you were at Stormforge for a while. Do you have insights into that? Is that anything you can share?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. From a tooling standpoint, honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know. We, at least on the Stormforge side, have folks have built like completely automated test suite. And what's hard for us is the machine learning. Like, think every environment is different. It's a snowflake. Some environment might be using the HPA on CPU. Some environment might be using the HPA on memory, or CPU plus memory, or a custom
Mm,
metric, or CADA. Like, that's maybe 15 different combinations you could put together. My math is probably wrong. I'm not the math person around here, but like that's just one use case of our product that
mm,
we need to make sure we're testing for. And every time we make a change to the algorithm, like at the end of the day, that's a
mm,
lot of trust that the customer has in us, that we're making these changes in production live
mm,
that we have to run a ton of tests for. And so as a result, we've had to kind of augment the tools that we have and build a lot of it DIY internally to make sure we're covering those use cases. And then the interesting part for us is like the testing environments, because like EKS is different than OpenShift, right? And that comes with its own fun hurdles. So
mm, mm, mm,
that's I'd say a current opportunity for us of how we kind of consolidate and make sense of all the different testing environments we need. And if we can provide any, like if we can even be cost optimized, we run our own stuff internally, which has helped us save costs, but also like we catch things before
mhm,
customers do.
mhm.
So trying to take that approach to then the rest of the portfolio now that we're in the CloudBolt world of how can we build some of that automated testing within the rest of the portfolio.
Yeah, the number of permutations must be huge. I'm also thinking, if you test for different Kubernetes versions, because I'm guessing that older
Yep.
versions of just the underlying mechanics have improved, but also that they've introduced new function features that relate to resource allocation, etc. So even that must be dimensions that, and I'm sure you have customers that are still on really old versions of Kubernetes, or
Yeah.
at least not everyone is as quick to adopt new versions or technology as you'd like them to be.
Yeah, for sure. And like some of our customers are very large banks. And as you can imagine, like they don't upgrade that quickly. So we have a wide support matrix. And even like then Kubernetes comes out with new features like recently the in place pod resizing,
Mm,
which everyone's been super excited about. We're also excited about it. But like if you actually look at the feature, there's a ton of caveats. And so when you're testing that, you got to make sure, okay, in this environment, we know it's going to work. In this environment, we know it's not going to work. It's in the docs that it's not going to
mm,
work. So like, having the automation detect those things versus like a human having to go run a test and then make sure it works and everything. That's been fun challenge.
I can imagine. Okay,
Yeah.
one thing that we've talked about with others in previous episodes is this topic of testing in production, which is usually when you uh, gonna go to a QA conference, it's a little bit of an anti-pattern for many people, but ultimately, I think almost all the people we've talked to here do that in one way or another. I'm curious. I mean, in your space specifically, you said you're using the product internally to optimize your own workload. So I'm guessing that is a way of testing in production, or do you
Yeah.
can you do that in, or do you do that in other ways as well?
We do that in some other ways too. So, like from a UI standpoint, we have a bunch of feature flags, the way that we deploy some of the products. And so, obviously, that gets automated tests throughout the pipeline, but then
Mm,
we can see it with live, real data with either our own data, with like in a customer environment that we've talked to them about, hey, we're going to turn this on. Like, let's get feedback. Let's like test it there. We have a little bit of that we'll do, I guess, from a
mm,
feature flag standpoint, and then have the ability to turn it off as needed. Our internal systems are our production because our customers all run
mm,
on that.
mm,
So like
mm,
that is essentially testing in production because we get it before the customers get it. So yes ish, but like we don't do any large type of load testing in
mm, mm.
production, anything like that. That's still non-prod for us.
Okay. So, I mean, a reflection on just the concept of um, cost optimization and resource. It seems to me like that's something everyone should be doing. Why? But they're
Why
not.
aren't they? Yeah.
Well, maybe it's like testing. Everybody should be testing more, but they're not. Is there some inherent challenge with that makes it hard for people to adopt, or is it just that they're just not aware? Or to your point, it's a low priority thing. Is there other things that are more important, or what do you think is kind of hindering more broad adoption of those kind of solutions?
Yeah, it's probably 2 things. One is a people challenge, and the other is just like a scale challenge. The people challenge is the folks that are responsible for changing the resources is the platform team, like the Kubernetes engineer, DevOps, that group.
Mm,
But the people that set them and are impacted by them are the developers. And so now you have non-shared incentives because
mm,
the platform team's like, hey, we got to right size. Either you're undersized or you're oversized. We got to make a change to the workload. And then the development team's like, how do I know you're not going to break my workload? And like
mm,
that's obviously a way oversimplification, but at the root of it, that's what always happens in any environment. Like sometimes even we'll talk to platform engineers that like, doesn't matter. We're just going to turn this on and it's going to be opt out. And then the developers have to take the changes. And I'm
mhm,
like, okay, you could take that approach, but like almost always what happens is they deploy it out. Something happens that maybe doesn't even have to do with the product itself, but like it then opens a conversation of, well, I didn't have this before, so what are you doing? What like if you don't have that developer buy-in, it's really hard. Unless you're a small org and you can just like
mm,
flip the switch and run it everywhere. But especially in the larger organizations, it comes down to people, and sometimes people don't like talking to each other.
mm,
Sadly, like, it all often comes down to just that. So we try and broker that, one, through just, like, encouragement of talking to the different groups. I
mm,
feel like I'm back in my puppet days of, like, DevOps. So, like, "Hey,
mm,
just talk to each other." But then the other of, like, driving that through software. So
mm,
making sure developers can interact with the software via, like, annotations like they're used to for the rest of their deployment. They can just, like, do their Kubernetes, configurations for right sizing also via annotations and build that confidence, give them control over machine learning. Humans like to make sure they can constrain things that they, are going to happen out of their control. So giving them every single configuration, the ability to control it. I'd say that's the like people side of the challenge. And then the scale part is at the end of the day, you're just changing like three settings. You're changing requests, limits, and potentially target utilization on the HPA. I guess for CPU and memory. So now we're up to what, like five? Five times how many workloads do you have? 20,000, 50,000. We have customers with 200,000. Like that is it's a hard math problem.
mhm,
And what makes sense today, today's Friday, right? What makes sense today doesn't necessarily make sense tomorrow from a resource profile. And if you just set an average, then that means you're going to be wrong part of the time because you set an average. And so figuring out the right setting for the right time and then automatically deploying it just becomes a scale challenge that some people try. Like we often get pulled into the conversation when an organization's like, yeah, we know we need to cut down our costs. We know we're super over provisioned in our Kubernetes environment. We wrote some scripts, tried to take some averages, and it was just too painful. And it didn't work because then it broke something because the HPA then came in and scaled and it didn't work. So It's always a good time to have that conversation because they feel the pain versus otherwise it's just a daunting task of like, well,
Mm.
can I even do this? Is this possible?
One thought, I mean, I'm obviously approaching this from a testing angle. Once again, it seems like testing could be an important piece here. And when you introduce a tool like this as a way to like ensure that things continue to work, right? So if your application team has thorough end-to-end tests or functional tests, and then you turn on a CloudBolt and you run those test suites, you'll both see that hopefully that things don't break, but you'll also see maybe performance profiles of those tests going either up or down. Do you see testing being as a use to validate that
For sure.
a tool like this does what it's supposed to do and doesn't break things?
Yeah, yeah. We always encourage people to like run this in a real environment, right? And like not don't run it in production on day one unless you really
Mm,
want to. We've had some people like, no, we want to run. I'm like, I don't know, but we encourage them to run in a real environment, throw performance testing data at it. Don't put it in like a dev environment that has no traffic and nothing's happening.
mm,
What results are you going to get? Machine learning is going to be like, you're not using this environment, shut it down.
mm,
So we definitely encourage that. I think testing
mm,
is a key part here. And it's a lot nicer now than it was in like 2020, where it's like, wait, testing what?
mm.
How do I do this in Kubernetes? So it's like I have yet to run across an organization that doesn't have at least some way to test their Kubernetes environment. So that's been a big help.
Yeah, and I mean, like automated, both like you said, performance tests, but also just functional tests, having end-to-end integrations test suites that can be run. And I guess that could also be ways to experiment with different configurations of CloudBolt to see kind of how do they impact the performance of our target system or the functionality. Or if, um, okay, great, that's super interesting. Any final words from your end on cost optimization or testing or something in between?
Uh, oh boy, final words. It's a lot of pressure.
There we
I
go.
mean, honestly, I think just the maturity of the ecosystem now has been really nice to see. Where I feel like I say this every time I'm at KubeCon talking to people. Every year, the conversations are just like dramatically more mature than the year before. Where
Mhm,
before, like people didn't have performance testing tools. Then it was, wait, why would I even right size? Like my environment's not that big enough. Why is this a problem? Then it became like, yeah, I've tried this and like I couldn't do it. So then I just kind of
mm,
let it be as it is. And then now I think this year we'll see. I can't predict the future, but the market conditions are interesting. The economy is interesting right now. More and more we're seeing like people kind of tightening their kind of cost belts, and so it'll be interesting to see those initiatives kind of rise to the top of importance and really be the driver to help people go
yeah.
and automate their right sizing.
Yeah, just actually a question occurred to me here. So is there like an inflection point when it's time to start using a tool like CloudBolt, or do you just like, often people start testing late or too late at least.
Yeah.
And you'd always say we should be, writing some basic tests from the beginning. Is it the same thing here that you should be, there's an advantage of putting a tool like this into place really, really early, even if you're, to your point, really not using the capacity that you have, but that will help guide you kind of going forward as your application scales. Do you have like a recommendation there?
Yeah, we typically like we have a sizing like 1,000 vCPUs. Once you're at that point, then it's like okay, it makes sense. You want to be right sizing, but the reality is, even in a small environment, you want to make sure your requests are set correctly, not for cost, but for reliability. Like we've talked
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of very small, like smaller orgs, products that are just about to launch that haven't even deployed to prod yet, and they don't have their request set at all. And if you don't have your request set, you don't have any resources promised to you. So I think right sizing, like it's exciting from a cost standpoint, but at the end of the day, it's more about making sure your requests are just set correctly, whether that's not making it too high or not making it too low. So starting very early is super important for anyone.
Okay, just like with testing. So perfect. Thank you so much, Yasbit. It's been a pleasure having you on this episode. Thank you to all listeners listening and looking forward to a future episode. Bye bye. Thank you, Yasmin.
Thanks for having me.